if that's good enough for you.
I think so. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Howdy.
Interrupting his school day, aren't we?
Oh, his school day hasn't started yet. September 8th.
That's right. I don't want to rush it.
Shall we?
Oh, here comes the other one. You want to say hi too?
Hi.
Howdy.
Hi, how are you?
Dr. Thomas, Mike, and Dr. Gant are about to get on. They're finishing up their meeting.
Okay, great. And so I don't think we have, no, it's all family. Okay. But Greg, I do have your comments up. I tried to send a clean document without the gifts and stuff in it, so that wouldn't be a distraction for us. But I'm looking at your document, the document that had your comments, and so I'll refer to those as we go through.
Yeah, and I'm doing the same thing. Presumably, we're going to be looking at on the main screen on the agenda. We're going to be looking at the norm,
Yes, just the norm.
and then I've got my computers, my other one set up for the Google Doc.
Okay. And that is our norm. So Lisa, thank you for the agenda being up, but I think the only thing that I had on there was for us to do, first of all, acknowledgements of who's on the call, and then go straight into the discussion of the norm, because we only have like an hour and I wanted to make
Okay,
sure we got out.
do you want me to share this, Norm, or did Mr. Davis, did you have a Google sheet? Would you run?
No, I think Linda wants to share the
The one that I have loaded in Board Docs?
right.
Okay.
Now, I sent you a replacement for that. Is that the one?
I already replaced it.
Awesome. So yes, if we can see that one, I think we'll be in good place, in a good space.
Let me go ahead. There we go.
Okay. Yes, that's perfect. So while we're waiting for Dr. Thomas and Dr. Gant and Mr. Pruitt, I can start our roll call perhaps. Why don't we do that? Just an acknowledgement of who's here, so that would be a part of our minutes as well.
Okay.
Linda,
Yeah.
before you start that, is there a way, Lisa, because I'm looking at the document and I'm looking at who's at the meeting, but there's a lot of gray space in between. Is there a way of making that document bigger so we can read it? Is it
Unfortunately, I think because it's a PDF, I'm trying to see if I can make it bigger.
Greg, if you
there
go to the top to view options,
yeah.
you can pick a bigger size.
Oh,
What about this? Is this too big for you guys?
perfect. It's good
No,
for
that's
me.
big. That's very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, Linda.
Okay, so just to acknowledge who's here already, I see Lawrence is here and muted. I see Lisa, thank you for being here. Kara, Dykeman, Greg Davis. I think we're not going to call Mr. Faison, but thank you for being here to get us live. And of course, I'm here too. We didn't elect a committee chair, so I guess as we do our research on our norms, we will be the presenters for our committee. So the one that I chose was number 4. I don't know what I was thinking, but number 4, and that deals with the annual planning, the calendar, and the agenda. And so already this norm has been shared among the committee or between the committee members, and we have some comments from Mr. Davis. So I'd like to kind of hang out now and wait so that we don't have to repeat anything for our other participants, if that's okay. Any thoughts that you guys have about this process, though, that we might be able to kind of work through as we wait for the other participants?
You mean the process of developing the norms?
Yes, and putting the, and then this method of getting them out.
I mean, I still think you know, based on what they said last night, that maybe these smaller committee meetings aren't as efficient, but I do think it's still helpful to have one person start a norm so that when the board gets together, there's at least a starting point. But I guess going by what Dr. King said last night, explaining it in a small group and then having to explain it again to the whole board maybe is not the most efficient process.
And I totally can agree with that and support any change that we need to have here. For me, I think it was because what I did is simply went into Board Docs and Google Calendar. And then all of the things that popped up for calendar, I looked at those to see what was the impact to this norm. And I did the same thing for annual planning and agenda. And so that's why there's so many attachments, but it did also help provide clarity in terms of what are the things that we can expect because of our policies. And then the question became, did I leave out anything because of the laws and stuff? And so the only thing I saw another reference to was the Open Meetings Act. And I didn't see anything there that said it needed to be on our calendar, except that they had to be public. And so if those meetings were at any time conducting board business, then we needed to have them publicly. So that didn't do a lot for me, but it's again, a reference that somehow I picked it up on calendar, and I can't remember how that went, maybe in terms of how long you have to post things or the time period that things needed to be posted. That might be what I picked up from that. It's been a while since. Welcome, Dr. Thomas. Not yet here.
Linda, I am a little confused about, are we putting, is this the format that we've been asked to use, or everyone's coming up with their own format, or?
This is the format that I thought we were asked to use, and I'm following
okay.
the last lead that I saw.
Okay. Okay.
If somebody has something different, I'm certainly amenable to that. So I see we have Dr. Thomas and somebody else joined us. We have Mike Pruitt. Thank you both for being here, and Lakeisha. So these are the people that I was expecting for the call, and we've done pretty much of a roll call to just say who's on the call. And what we were just talking about was a continuation of the conversation from last night about the efficiency of our small meetings or small committee meetings. We haven't come to any conclusions except to just acknowledge that that conversation took place. And then I shared with the group how I put this one together. So I simply went to Google Docs and I Googled the 3 subject areas that the norm was to address. And that was the calendar, the annual planning, and the agenda. And so if there was a policy that had those words in it, then I looked at those words and I put them here as reference if they seem to add relevance to what we were trying to do, if nothing more than justification, but also some placeholders for things that we need to make sure that our calendar has and that we address annually. So with that said, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at the norm. So I'm going to pause for us to take a moment, because the norm is really only 1, maybe 2 pages. Yeah. And then the rest of it is appendix. And so what I did is, so that you didn't have to do what I did, I just attached all of the documents that I pulled from Board Docs to the norm. Now, when we assemble these, we don't have to, I'm sure, continue that, but that's probably a conversation that we might want to have. I think I've seen a couple of norms where they only listed the documents as opposed to including the full policies in the appendix.
Miss Linda, can I speak?
Sure, please do.
So I may have mentioned a little bit of this last night, but what will be on the work session in September is going back and reviewing how we do the norms. And a recommendation for us moving forward, at least from that day forward, to do to basically complete the remaining norms, like high priority norms, with GSBA as facilitators.
Okay,
But that of course, that doesn't mean that the individual work or the committee work that has been done is for nothing, because these may actually fall under those top priority norms. Like the board may decide like this particular norm is one, you know. So like when I was in schools, I would go in classrooms and say, if you could address 2 or 3 behavior expectations, what would they be that you feel like would change the culture and environment? Basically, we probably need to do that as we prioritize the remaining norms, like which ones have caused us the most discord and trouble. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that moving forward or in the future at some point, we will likely be looking at, all of us will be looking at the norms all together. And then secondly, to your point about what you include, in the meeting that I had with GSBA, that Mike and I attended with GSBA, they did have as one of their talking points that it should be as simple as possible. So not have as much information, because you really want your new board members, you want the public to be able to go to it and see exactly what to do. So that's one of the areas that we'll probably have to correct on ours. If you remember, it was a whole history, an appendix with ours that we may end up needing to take out. Thank you.
I'm real excited about that. Okay, so with that said, I don't know if we even need to continue the discussion. We can, since we have most of us here, or we can simply table this until September. I'll take the voice of the committee.
I say we're here. Let's discuss it.
Thank you, Greg. Kara?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine with me. I think we don't have to get it all worked out, but if there are some questions or things that we can be thinking about with respect to this norm, I think that's a good thing.
Awesome. All right, so Mike, Dr. Pruitt, Mr. Pruitt, Dr. Thomas, thank you for being here. Did you want to say something before we jump into this, or did you have an opportunity to even look at it yet?
I have looked over it, and I was actually, when I was reviewing back again, looking at your rationale, I like the connection, that, of course, with the strategic plan, but that when you talk about the progression from annual planning to building the annual calendar to then setting agendas. So I like the flow of essentially saying all of this work should really connect to each other, and having processes or ways in place for us to ensure that work is helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
Linda,
That was
I'm not
I'm
sure
sorry?
I ever got a copy of it. I can't find it if I did. Could you send it?
Oh,
to me?
okay. Let me see if I can do that easily.
Linda, I can just forward it to him right now.
Oh,
on my
super.
computer.
Thank you. That'd be
Kara, because I was trying to pull mine back up.
Okay.
So I could find it.
So we posted it on board docs with the meeting notice, and so I probably did not send it, and I apologize for that.
I'm sorry that you're right. I forgot. I thought I was supposed to have it. I couldn't remember where.
Mhm. I had looked at it before, but I couldn't find it when I went to pull it back up, but that's why.
Okay.
Uh,
So
I
this is
had-
the only one I volunteered for, so you won't have to, I'm good right now. We can get this one done. I'll be so happy. I'm sorry, Greg, were you about to say
Yeah, I
something?
just had a question for you, Linda. And I should have made a note when I first looked at it. But when we talk about the annual calendar, we're not talking about the school district's annual calendar. We're talking about the annual calendar for the board in terms of what we review.
again, that's my expectation here is that we're not, no, definitely not the calendar that the school district posts now. We probably have some impact there, but that's not what this is about. This is pretty much about what the board has to do annually. Because
Okay.
there's some things that we have to sign and yada, yada.
Right,
So,
right. And we actually talked about having, would that also encompass what we've talked about in the past in terms of when we will cover certain topics, let's say through a superintendent's report based on certain timing of the year? Is that what?
so that's the conversation I
Okay.
think that needs to happen around these guidelines or these norms. And if we're all on the same page in terms of expecting that I was trying to get to who's on first, right? Is it the calendar? Is it the agenda? Well, we know it's not the agenda, but, and is it the plan? So my logical progression was from strategic plan to a calendar that makes sure that we capture all of the things that are required of us in based on the strategic plan and based on law and based on policy. And that becomes from the annual planning, that becomes the calendar, the basis of setting up a calendar for what needs to be discussed. And then the agenda setting part is the piece that actually puts that into motion, that says this is when we'll discuss that.
Okay.
That was my thinking. And I tried to say that in those words. Now, if that's not there, then we need to do some wordsmithing on that to make sure that that's clear, if that's how we all perceive that this should go forward.
I think that makes sense. So the annual planning, that would be like a 2-day retreat kind of thing. Is that the idea that would happen? And then from there, the calendar would be not necessarily finished in that retreat, but kind of that would be the start of the discussion of the things to do during the year.
That's how I have experienced it. And again, in my bubble, that's how I have experienced it, is that out of the meetings really talking about the strategic plan and what's important for the year, you get a sense of what you've got to cover and the things that are important to the board that need to be, significantly addressed. And so from there, it was agenda setting. So the list actually became the calendar, and so it's a list more so than a calendar. And then the agendas were set based on when that information was appropriate and the best time to present that information relative to the work that was being done. And that set up the year for the actual board meetings and work sessions, more the work sessions. So that's how I recall it. Or that's how I rationalize it in making my plans and understanding. So if somebody has a different experience, I'm more than willing to listen to what that might be.
No, I think that that's good. I just was wondering, I guess, from people in administration, whether that is the time, like is July the time when that would make sense to happen? Would it make sense for that to happen earlier or later? I don't know. I haven't been a part of that before, so I don't know what makes sense.
So and I think I have the board governance binder that was put together for us by Dr. Means, and it was based on after the school year, when you look at how things went that year and what went well within the district in terms of programming and the kinds of things that we were introducing, that's when those changes took place. If something turned out not to be as effective as anticipated, then that's when I started hearing conversations about, well, we'll be looking for a different program for ELA next year or something like that. So it made sense that tied to the strategic plan and the results that we were reporting on the strategic plan, that would be the optimum time to make those changes. And again, it's between the end of year evaluation where you have your summative results for the previous year and before you launch another school year. And so that usually typically happens around June, July timeframe.
I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of how it lines up with the budget, because the budget is done in May for the following year. And if some of the things in the kind of reflection and annual planning might impact budget changes for the following year, or if there are things that might want to be changed, like looking at a new curriculum or something else, I feel like that would need to be decided earlier than July.
The major, I'm fine with that. And again, so I think that what we see is, and it's never worked for us, so let me just be really clear. A couple of superintendent evaluations. At the end of year evaluation, that's when the list of performance things showed that there may be some things that we wanted to do differently, or we would want the superintendent to do differently. And so when the superintendent worked that into the calendar for the year, right, then that's when we started to see some of those changes. So I'm really clear that it has to be pretty much, you've got to relate the evaluation into this as well. So we have that May-June timeframe for the mid-year evaluation. We have the end of year evaluation that we've had in December. And I know that from our committee meeting, from the Superintendent's Evaluation Committee, there's a question about when is the year end. And so I think that question has to be settled in addition to looking at the annual plan, because if we're going to try and make this logical, I think we would want to be able to make a recommendation on evaluations as well as salary treatment or renewal of contracts around the same time, but it would not make sense to me to do that after if we haven't done the annual plan and we haven't looked at the strategic plan to see what might be different. We've done it that way, it just doesn't seem logical to me.
I'm all for making it logical. I would love, and I would love for us to know when all of these things, I would love to have more of a calendar of when these things happen. So I'm all for that. I just don't know what the best times are.
Okay. So Dr. Thomas, this is this is going to be your no, you've been through that first part of the year kind of chaotic time. So what suggestions do you have for us on that, and how would that best fit with how you set up your operations for the year?
You're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Dykeman. I was saying that I'm logging into board docs now so I can look at the documents. Okay, there's the attachment. I'm sorry, Ms. Davis. I thought it was in my Google folder. But it's
Should
not.
be, but
I've got it here now, the entire.
Well, one thing I think that Kara mentioned with the budget, and I think that has been one of the biggest challenges that we've had as a board is that the and I may be incorrect in this, and Dr. Thomas can correct me, but it seems like that in terms of central leadership and school-based leadership, they begin discussions on the budget back in January. Whereas typically the board doesn't even mention the budget until May. Given that's one of our three areas of responsibility, it seems like we're kind of late to the party. I don't know what other people think, but that would be one reason to have that calendar so that we know when we're supposed to pivot on like a discussion of the budget.
And so as Ms. Davis said, of course, this is my first time doing it in this capacity, but I did work very closely with Dr. Means on that last year as well. And so you're right, that conversation starts around January, but at that point, it's having individual departments look at their departmental budgets, looking at what forecasted resources we will have and means what the funding streams are looking like. But really they started around January meeting with each department just to say, what do you have? What do you need? What are you going to cut? What do you want to continue? Kind of that stop, start, continue conversation. So you're right, Mr. Davis, that conversation does start then, but it's more one-on-one conversations of just trying to get a feel for what each department needs. And that of course takes some time. In previous years, I know we set budget priorities and then that was brought to you all, but you're right, that's usually May-ish. And I know there's been some conversation about participatory budgeting. There's been some conversation about the board having input into things that they would like to see funded. And so, depending on how you all choose to move forward with that, then I could see the need to start having that conversation earlier.
Well, okay, so I'm still trying to just validate that this progression is still a good progression and what we may need to say differently in our rationale. So if we're looking at the rationale alone, what changes do we need to make there?
Annual planning, calendar development.
I think the progression and the rationale makes sense. I guess the question is really, for me, when does that annual planning take place for the next school year? Does that start in like January, February, or does that start later in the summer?
And I agree. I think this is fine. This is what I was referencing in my earlier comments, Ms. Davis, that I feel like that this progression is good. But now I guess we're back to Dr. Dykeman's question though. When does the annual planning begin?
And would that level of detail be in the norm? I think it would be good for us to know and have a sense of what a calendar looks like. Maybe there's a typical calendar example that could come forward as an exhibit for this norm. But yeah, so I hear you, Dr. Dyke, but I have those same questions like when, and what's the what is the antecedent? What must happen prior to that happening? What is the trigger for us to do these things? And so we do know that by state law, we have budget review, and that's why that May timeframe is there for the, and that's not to build a budget, that's to take the budget public. So I mean, the budget's done by then. So those are some of the calendar events that we have to plan for every year. But certainly backing up from that calendar event to when you start collecting your data, that's a function of what what's happening in your school system now, or what's happening now with the finance department, with the CFO and the department heads. And we typically get that announcement from them in board meetings that, we're starting this process now and so then the board has that information that the process has at least started for that. And so I really appreciate getting that kind of information that's relative to our strategic plan and to our budget planning too, as a part of our meetings. So
not this past year, or not this year, but last year, and it was right when we started, we had a retreat in January, like the end of January, where there weren't specific objectives other than us kind of laying out the priorities that we have as a board or things that we wanted to see, even if they were things that were not going to happen, but just they were just kind of like big picture things. And I thought that that was really helpful. And I wonder if we could do something like that, like end of January, where we talk about those things, and then maybe also start to just maybe have at the same time a strategic planning review of where we are and something like that. I don't know if it has to be something formal like that, but I just thought that that was really helpful.
And so can you remember if that was coincident with the superintendent's evaluation year end, or it was?
No, I think it was just something separate. And like I said, I had only been on the board for like a month, so I don't know if that was something that was brand new or something that had been done before, or if it was really more just to like, because we had a bunch of new board members, more of a introductory thing. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think you do raise a good point, Kara, in terms of you know, because of the way the election cycle is, I really think it's beneficial for new board members to be on the ground floor. You know, given the fact that they're staggering, so we're not having an entire 9-person new board coming on, but having both experienced and people who are just new to the board being able to, right from the beginning, look at what that calendar development looks like in January seems to me appropriate.
So we've not had I hear you saying calendar development session. So again, I'm just trying to think through where I have experienced this. And so.
Or annual planning, I guess. And when I think of annual planning, I think in concrete terms of how is that planning expressed?
Right.
You know, it's got to be expressed in writing, and I think linear. So that may be my own weakness, but.
So it sounds like there's some work to be done around annual planning. This doesn't express it well enough. So let's go down to that section under the process for annual planning, if you will. And I think you had some comments out here on your original the original document. Greg, I'm not sure, so you can bring those in as appropriate, but it says annual planning results in a calendar of events that drive the agenda planning for the monthly board work sessions. And so that part I think is still true, and as well as business meetings. Then the other events that do not reach the agenda may be properly added or added prior to adopting the agenda at each meeting, or reported out through the superintendent's report. And since I've been on the board, we've been trying to work that list in, because there's always a list of things that people want to know about that may not be specific in the strategic plan or something like that. So that list typically is out there, and it sounds like that first of the year meeting for annual planning should let us true up that list, either get rid of things that are no longer relevant or come up with our new list of priorities. That's happened before. And then annual planning does reflect that combination of the administrative needs of the district and the board's commitment to board development and execution. So that sounds to me like that should be some guidance for us to develop those calendars of things that need to happen in the coming year, right? And then if we look at numbers 1 through 4, yeah. Can you validate for me if the first statement is true, that it does happen prior to the fiscal year that begins July 1? Because that would make sense. So we're talking about a calendar annual planning, or are we talking about a school year annual planning? And that's kind of what that first one was trying to tease out.
Yeah, I was still thinking it would be a school year annual planning, but that if we met like at the end of January or whenever, there would already be things on our calendar for the remainder of that school year that we'd really just be starting to plan for the following.
Okay. And you would want to do that.
So is this
Yeah.
similar to what we already did? Maybe Dr. Gant, you and I did this in a less structured way, but in your identifying what the needs were for the board in terms of professional development based on Cognia, based on state DOE, based on individual needs. So it's working collaboratively. It wasn't done as a retreat. And maybe this year was different for several reasons. One, the pandemic, two, Cognia, three, being an interim. And this is kind of the first time I've seen some of this, but it sounds like, or it seems in my mind that we did some of this. Would you agree with that, Dr. Gant?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It almost seems like there are different parts to, like different layers to it, you know? So like with the professional development, the one that you mentioned, Dr. Thomas, is us having done, that being an element of a larger calendar. I know that, I think I just forwarded this to you, Ms. Davis. I'll go back and check, but I went back and I know that at some point we received a, this was like before our time, but we also happened to see some of the communication around the fall, at the beginning of the school year. It seems like this calendar had been set in place as far as what would need to be covered. And so I'm looking at a document that was referenced, literally, that has pretty much every detail for 2018-19 calendar, from the agenda items, what will need to be covered from each area, like Office of Early Learning,
Right.
special education, and then it goes on to almost build the structure of the agenda items based on what the district needs are. And I know that that existed. We were just onboarding in 2019, so we happened to see this. I think that email was from Ms. Bodika. So I know that that existed for 18-19, but then we also received, maybe in notebook form, something very similar. And that was, again, from the administration's perspective. So that would be from Dr. Thomas's perspective. And this particular document had in there the agenda items, if it's an action, if it would be an action item, which priority, and like the rationale. And it did that for each month. Now, again, I don't know if the one for 1920 was in the same format as far as like the Excel format that this is in, but it was something very similar. And so in my mind, it almost seems like some type of annual planning would include all of that. So professional development from a board's perspective, but then all of the other like benchmarks and things that the administration knows that the board they need to be updating us on.
So yes, Dr. Means compiled that for the board. And again, based on our input, so we'd have the sessions where we would talk about what's important and what the priorities were. And he would take that information and create these documents for us. He created the board governance document. That the first time I received one in hardback was, I don't remember what year it is. I think it takes us through 20, so it's the 1920. So we went from a spreadsheet to a binder. And the board never even reviewed that binder with him. And so we never actually sat down and fleshed this out, because I think that's where it became very evident that these are some things that you must do on a calendar year. These are the annual planning things that we came up with out of our last evaluation period. And that's what this document, what I think what spawned this document was the last evaluation, end of year evaluation, calendar year evaluation. And so that's what created this document. So that's why I was trying to say that it's tied to, or there's a relationship between the annual planning, the calendar, and also the evaluation. Yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Greg.
Yeah, I was just going to add that was presented to us as a whole cloth, and so I think that's one reason that it was not something that was generated through board discussion, through board input. And I think that's probably one reason why we didn't give it the attention that perhaps it deserved. But
Well, I'm disappointed to hear that because it came from the input from, and I can go back and find that from the evaluation in terms of the things that we thought were most important. And then the next time I saw that information was in this form saying this is where we can do this and this is where this fits. So part of that time I was also vice president. So we did have those conversations with how can we best lay this out? Even the training was laid out and we simply didn't get to execute on the things that we thought were important to us as a board. So the board did have input on this document. I'm going to disagree with you on that.
it may have been maybe the leadership did or something, because I don't remember, but I'm not gonna question you, Linda.
It's fine. It's kind of like if you remember back when Dr. Lanu was here and we came up with at the end of the evaluation cycle, when we did the evaluation, we came up with our list of priorities for the board. And I think we called it things that we can do better. And he changed the name to focus areas. And so we exhausted that conversation in the
I remember
evaluation
that.
process. And we
Yeah.
did the same thing with Dr. Means. So it's identical. Sorry you don't remember. But at any rate, that's, again, how do you get to this conversation about what's important to the board? If it's not in the context of the evaluation cycle or the strategic plan review.
So the strategic plan review, would that be, I was kind of thinking that could take place during that same annual planning retreat. So that part of it could be the review of how it's going so far, and then it would transition into what might need to change or what we might want to do in the future. I know that document talks about, things that the board is doing, but I feel like we need not just what the board needs to do. And I know it's tied in there, to the strategic priorities, but what I would like is a strategic plan review and then this conversation about what we need to do or change or move or prioritize for the following year. And then from that, figure out what the board's role is in that, and then lay out what the board needs to do. So I know we can only do, the things that the board can do, but for me, I would like to have a big picture of what the priorities are for the whole district and how that's going and whether there are any changes that will happen with that before deciding what the board's calendar items are.
So let me take it back. So when you do the superintendent's evaluation, you're evaluating the superintendent on the strategic plan. The strategic plan has the details of what the district is going to do to achieve the goals of the strategic plan. Each department has to put their initiatives into the strategic plan in terms of how they're going to do that and what the measurement is going to be. That is the strategic plan. It's what we want, is what gets us there, and that's each department's contribution. So when we tell the superintendent, or we have the conversation with the superintendent about the things that we find important, and then the community agrees on that, right? Then it went to each department head, and they are the ones, or the departments, I don't know how they did it, but they came up with the things that were critical for them in that year, and then the measurement. So this was that whole SMART objective thing that we've been going through for the last 3 years. And that reporting on the progress of those, not only monthly, but whenever they occurred, and trying to get them into that dashboard again, where we could see that ongoing, was the output from the strategic plan. And so it was we evaluated the superintendent based on his performance of the strategic plan. And that was based on the department in the district and how they met their objectives. And so as a result of that, we did that whole thing of rating and ranking the superintendent's performance based on the outcome, and that constituted the evaluations. And so out of that list is where you look to see, well, and the superintendent could also say, well, I'm going to change this one. And I do remember one that he did say he wanted to change. I don't know if we ever got around to that cycle yet, but that's where you come up with your list of things that are priorities for the district based on the fact that they either match your strategic plan, and we performed well on them, or something happened that it needed to change. And so the whole thing actually hinges on the development of the strategic plan, the measurements, and what people can put into achieving the goals or the objectives of that. It doesn't happen in a vacuum where you say, oh, gee, just let's look at the strategic plan. I mean, we could do that, but it would make more sense to do that at that mid-year time and also at the end of year, which is what policy CEI directs us to do.
So, and that's fine. I mean, I don't have a particular time when I feel like it needs to be done, but for board members like myself who came on after the strategic plan had already been developed, we were not involved in the development of the strategic plan. And so we actually never got a like presentation of the strategic plan. And I think that having a yearly presentation of the strategic plan, I mean, it doesn't have to be as extensive, and where we are and even down to, and I know we get that information to do the evaluation, but just a better understanding of the strategic plan, I think would be really helpful in being able to do an evaluation, but also in figuring out how to go forward in what we need to do in the next year.
Okay, so we're running out of time. I think at this point, what I'm hearing is, and somebody help me here, if we have to, as a board, get to a place where we understand fundamentally what drives our work. And if it's the strategic plan, hiring and firing the superintendent, and making policy, then obviously the strategic plan must be there. And if a new board comes on in the middle of a cycle, and these are usually 3 to 5 year cycles, there's always going to be a strategic plan. And so I think it's just a matter of calendaring or making it an agenda item to have a review of the strategic plan anytime you want to have a review of the strategic plan. But it doesn't change because we get new board members. The work is still the work. So I'm not sure how to fit in what you're saying. If we say we want to just have a review of the strategic plan, then yeah, we can do that. That's just a matter of everybody agreeing that that's something that you want to review.
Yeah, I just thought it could be folded in with this annual planning meeting so that there could be a review of the strategic plan and where we are to then inform the plan.
And so I thought that review fell at the mid-year and end of year evaluation of the superintendent. Because then you're taking care of the work of evaluating the superintendent against the strategic plan. And that seemed logical to me.
Not to throw in a total wrench, we do 2 evaluations, not by law, but because of tradition. Of 2,
policy.
well, yeah, by policy, by school board decision, not by law. And so I'm personally would like to revisit that as well, but
yeah, okay. I will note that as another one of those. Again, it goes on to it's a calendar item, right? Any of our policies can come back under review. I guess I'm just trying to get to a place where we're on the same page in terms of understanding what the components of our work are in relation to policy and law. And so that's what we should develop our norms around, I thought. We're about to run out of time, so I'm not going to try and push this through for these 8 minutes, but it's been great discussion. Any other comments about this? And then we'll just hold it until we get to the new process.
Well,
I have made some notes, Ms. Davis and Dr. Dykeman, based on some of the things you shared. I do know that Ms. Palmer has that list of what Dr. Gant was referencing, where we have the calendar for each month, what departments presenting on what information you all need to receive by month. And that usually goes out in the spring to department heads to say, you know, what are things you have to annually present to the board, things you have to have action on by the board to approve. And that's how that calendar is built. So like I know in September, we have to present on the Perkins funds. I was emailing and talking with Dr. Ramirez about that the last 2 days. So there's some things that legally we have to get to you at a certain time. So we have that document, and I will also made a note to get with Ms. Palmer to look at the notebook and see how we can revise that. And then within that, I think establishing a timeline where we get that input. I do remember some previous conversation about strategic plan, but I know we've all talked about that in the evaluation. I've been working with our team to get you data on this plan that ended in 2020, and then start finalizing. Each department is working on their priorities and goals for moving forward from 2020 to 22. So we are working on compiling that information and should be able to get it all to you. Unfortunately, COVID has happened and it has consumed every bit of our time, and we're start pulling back some from that work, but preparing for virtual learning, supporting students, supporting teachers, supporting leaders, responding to the community has literally been a 12+ hour day job. And we really want to be able to start looking at the strategic work and instructional plans. So that's a priority for us, clearly this week. So I should be able to get you all some updates on some of the things you've asked about.
And if I could just say two things, Dr. Thomas, about, in terms of developing that schedule. One is some discussion on the helicopter view of the budget for the board, like in January, and also in terms of the review of academic progress. I really think that what really slows us down is when we look at that piecemeal. And that's why I think that when we start talking about, because this is not a normal year and next year won't be a normal year, but it would seem like that when we really drill into academic achievement of the previous year, we need to make sure that we've got all the data that is possible, instead of having these gaps and we're trying to piece together. So anyway, those are just two suggestions I have.
And let me, Dr. Thomas, thank you for that offer. This call is not asking you to do anything differently. That's for sure. Let me make sure that's clear. The other thing that we were trying to do here was develop the board norms around the calendar, around the thing. So again, until the board is clear on the strategic direction for the district, I don't know how your departments can respond with how they're going to get there. And so I think you have to start with the beginning, and the beginning is the strategic plan. And so again, because it doesn't change that drastically from one superintendent to the next, it would be, I think, a great exercise to actually look at the measurements that were agreed upon prior for this school year or for the 2020 year and see if those are doable. If they are doable in your current situation, then I don't know that there's a whole lot to develop there. If they're not, then that's where we would have those changes into what's different about the strategic plan, and then also those things that may be pressing for the board as a criteria if they're not covered under this current strategic plan. And that way we can at least have some continuity. I don't think that I've ever seen a situation where an institution absolutely abandons the strategic direction because you have a change in leadership. Again, I think that's not logical to my thinking. So with that, I'm going to again suggest that we think through this. I thought I was done, but sounds like I have some more homework to do. But again, if it's about the norms for the board, I'm not sure I can separate that right now from the things that seem to be the impediments, and that's some of the wins that things happen. And so I don't know that there's a norm about that, or if that's simply the reality of what we must do based on the law, based on our policies. That's the wins that happen. And so I didn't think our norms were trying to get that specific in terms of when things happen. So I might not be the norm writer for this one, but there's my best effort. So if you would, please, the document is in Google Docs. If you would go into Google Docs and make your comments on that, that would be helpful for whenever we have this conversation again. that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, great. I appreciate it. I think it is after 1 o'clock. And I know some other people had some other meetings. Oh, we've got 2 more minutes. All right. Anybody else have anything else they want to share? Love that little bird chirp.
That's at my house.
I like it. Any other comments? Any
Nope.
questions?
I think that this, you know, is worth more conversation at some point. I know that as we, as a board, identify what those high priority norms are, this in fact may fall in there. I don't know, it may not. But I definitely think the meeting agendas and how those are set, I know that's been a point of contention before, or in the past. And it would seem that if we keep in mind the definition of the norm, which is to sort of regulate and create a specific process for board behavior, that some of this, like there may be aspects of the annual planning that may fall, you know, that may fall within the area of the norm. But by and large, the annual planning, from that standpoint, to me, would fall more within like operations and with calendar development. That would be something that would fall within. And I think you've already said, people have already said this, but I guess I'm just trying to think through the purpose of our norms and it being specific for us as board, and which parts of these really are not directly under the purview of board members. So doesn't mean that we can't have conversations around it and maybe even give input, because even with that, you know, with that last plan, the 2019-2020 notebook that outlined a whole lot of other things, the board was asked if there were any additional areas that were not listed or any topics, share those so that those could be considered and possibly added. And so, you know, that to me was an opportunity for collaboration, although it did not rest with us. It did not start. And so some of these areas may not necessarily even start, which means they may not even be a norm. Some of them are, like our own annual professional development, and you know, planning, but I guess just more conversation around that would
I agree. That would love to see that. Now you're fading in and out, Lakeisha. Can't hear you. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
All right. Well, we have definitely reached the 1 o'clock hour, 2 o'clock hour, and thank you for those closing thoughts and comments. Other comments, I would say, can again address those through the channels that you normally do. And I look forward to hearing more about the GSBA leadership on our norms development.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.